I have, time and time again, mentioned how much of a sucker I am for interactions between sapient species, a concept we can only fantasize about, explore the idea and its possibilities in fiction, a narrative element that can be inconspicuous or treated with emphasis, a tool, but as all elements with no precedence in real life, it is also a goal, something we have to make possible through world building. Creating the biology, society, factions, nations, history, religion, and other aspects of a sapient species is complex enough already, but that is not necessarily all there is to it. Depending on how many of these creatures we want to include, some justifications for their abundance might be necessary. A setting with myriad intelligent creatures stands in stark contrast to our own world, but how far-fetched is it really to have more than one of these beings? Earth did, after all, have multiple hominids that were or could have become sapient themselves. A world where different intelligent species interact on a meaningful level was a potential future at some point. Or was it? Homo sapiens now exists as the sole sapient creature on this planet for a number of reasons. Some of these early people were simply unfit to survive in their environment. Others fell victim to the success of modern humans, with ancient conflicts exacerbating the problem. Whatever happened exactly, one thing is clear. All opposition, however benign or aggressive, now lies buried and fossilized. Logically, one might extend the same principle to foreign globes and alternate versions of our world. Perhaps this is an inevitability, a law of nature rather than random chance. There might very well be space for only one sapient species on any planet, which would not be ideal for what we are trying to achieve. So this is a problem. We are trying to build something unprecedented and potentially unlikely. The more species we want, the more difficult it is to believe our setting could be real. Something to overcome if we want to make the best world we can. First things first though, what are the inherent dangers of being sapient? Why is it so likely that the majority of such creatures would die off, become extinct before they can even leave the Stone Age? Well, we can discern some of these factors by taking a look at what might have been the root issue for other hominids, as well as considering some broad tendencies of nature. The most obvious occurrence is one I have already lightly touched upon. There is a species that is simply better. They might have achieved rudimentary technological advancements faster, like constructing better tools, or just tools in general. They might have a better way of communicating, they could be physically more adept, stronger, faster, possess better stances, a higher resilience. Maybe they have more children, or are better at ensuring their survival. There are a multitude of ways one creature can be better than another at what is essentially life. This is what we call being outcompeted. There is something better at what they are doing and where they are doing it. If that thing is the only way they can stay alive, in a world of limited resources, that is a one-way ticket to getting a little cross next to your name on Wikipedia. But even if the competitor is not universally better, they may beat the other species into, well, extinction. Aggression, martial prowess, an inherent fear or hatred towards outsiders, there are a lot of drivers that can lead a species down a warpath, even if during that era calling it a war is a bit misleading. Small conflicts wherever the two creatures collide, with one side winning decidedly more often. Naturally, killing off an entire species would likely be not on the mind of the aggressors, it would simply be a result of relentless assaults and a skewed balance of power, with potential help from a genetic bottleneck. Then there is also the possibility of assimilation in some cases, by which I mean the biological unification of their gene pools, not a peaceful coexistence. The closer they are genetically, the more likely this is. As you probably guessed, lizard people and snail men would not become abominations of nature over time, not unless the rules of genetics in that world are seriously borged. No, this is more so an argument against very similar beings that more than likely share quite a few of their allele pairs, like humans and elves, or humans and dwarves, or humans and halflings, or humans and gnomes, or humans and... You know what? I think you get the picture. It's probably the most egregious with the typical elves. Save for the ears and the longer lifespan in some cases, they are basically the same in many settings. In reality, one becoming a fragment in the other's gene pool is more likely to be the outcome of such a dynamic. Like Neanderthals for modern humans, although that is a tad more complicated than our hypothetical. But I digress. This is far from all the dangers. Even just the chance of multiple sapient species evolving, especially from different ancestors, is relatively low. prioritizing intelligence has quite a few associated drawbacks. It is more of a gamble than a sound strategy. Humans are living proof that it can really pay off in the long run, but it's quite a challenge early on. A large brain requires numerous adaptations. First off, it is a significant drain on resources. That's food that is not going to your muscles, your size, building materials that will not be used on more specialized body parts. Intelligence is a hell of a tool when used right, but it is kind of a Swiss knife where you have to install the various bits. Instead of having sharp claws and powerful jaws to kill, you have to realize what you need, get the materials, build the weapon, and then use it. It will eventually be better than whatever your body could have produced, especially with more advanced technology, but extra work is required. So not only is it necessary to expend more resources to have that computer in your head, you also need to spend more calories executing those ideas. And then you can hunt, as opposed to being able to do that right out of the box. It is not a surprise this level of intelligence is not a common strategy, as efficiency is not its strong suit. Its advantages lie more so in versatility and high potential, but those are not exactly readily apparent assets. Which brings us to the likelihood of pursuing a lifestyle where a gradual increase in grey matter is favored by evolution. It will happen from time to time, but rarely to the extent of sapience. To top it all off, babies are useless for far longer than those of other animals. Their ability to walk, run, climb, fight back, hide, find and obtain food, or just to not kill themselves is kind of below average for creatures of such progeny. Well below. The first hit comes from a body lacking innate tools. The second comes from their one core asset developing rather slowly. They need quite a bit of time to mature, and their brain won't even be fully developed by the time they will need to rely on it. And to top the top off, this is by necessity a case strategist lifestyle. Simply put, few offspring, meaning every death is more impactful. And yet, humans exist. Every issue I've listed can all be counteracted by the intellectual powerhouse that is a sapient mind. But it is definitely an uphill battle. At the very least, devolution is not something we have to worry about. People regressing back into an animalistic state is a common trope in fiction, but it is a highly unlikely prospect. As I said, human bodies are rather pitiful in many aspects, carried by strengths of the mind. In your possession are tools that are far too useful in almost every situation to disappear. Speech is a big one, but there's also the ability to craft, build, create records, or navigate, among others. Things even primitive humans benefited from because they are beneficial in the most primal of settings. So no screeching man beasts running around with shreds of cloth covering their naughty bits. Not as a result of evolution under normal circumstances, at the very least. They are more likely to just die off at that point. But I digress. How do we make the presence of many conscious creatures easily believable? Well, that depends on a lot of factors. But luckily, there are quite a few potential reasons for having multiple sapient species that can fit a multitude of scenarios. This video aims to list all that I could think of. As per usual, there are likely to be more, but I do think my collection offers an adequate stepping stone to launch your own work from. What better place to begin than with perhaps the simplest of possibilities? Ones that more so tear this problem out of the setting and kick it into orbit than work hand in hand with natural laws. I'm talking about divine assistance or magic, which are no less valid options than others, but they definitely bully the difficulties I have laid out rather than engage with them. For the most part anyway. Something celestial or really powerful ensuring that their grand vision is realized is a rather simple and intuitive concept. If there is a creator, or at least something akin to an architect or director, it would be logical that they do everything in their power to ensure their creatures survive. Even the weakest, least adaptable beings can be brute forced into relevance, or a continued existence at the very least. There is not much to discuss here, the writer simply needs to be aware of the flaws of a given species and have an idea of how it was counteracted. Lifting them up, destroying the competition, bending reality to fit them, divine intervention can take any form, and there is only one requirement for this solution. One has to keep in mind that these beings are favored by the deity, who is prepared to go to great lengths to ensure their survival. So, accounting for that deus ex machina, or explaining its absence, is somewhat of a necessity. That being said, falling out of favor is always an option, and such an Armageddon is quite a novel concept. On the other hand, using magic to grant artificial tenacity to a group of creatures is a tad bit different. Well, not necessarily, but let's assume that the arcane forces are not sentient or serve a greater intellect. Magic simply does what it does by natural law or happenstance. It could be a heightened affinity for witchcraft or a spell-infused body that exceeds its natural capabilities. Perhaps it is magic shielding or hiding these beings from those that could annihilate them. Or maybe it is a curse upon the stronger species that keeps them from slaughter by hand or by proxy. Certainly one of the more apparent solutions to the problem, one that can yield many narrative threads for one to explore. It is also another one that doesn't seem quite fair. These two might seem rather heavy-handed approaches, as there is an inherent imbalance in the world. There are those that survive against all odds, while others enjoy significant benefits thanks to no feat of their own. These do run the risk of lifting the curtain a little too much, showing the machinations of the world builder even if no mistakes are made. This tends to happen where the unfairness is too strong, permeating multiple facets of the setting. If the chosen race happens to be good at a host of activities and is just racking up victories and achievements, that can get a bit grating for the audience. People might assume this is just your favorite OC please don't steal species that you elevate at every chance, even if that wasn't the intent. Therefore, I'd recommend giving them more flaws, make them suffer losses or commit morally grey, even reprehensible actions. They already have at least one weakness, as they would not need the divine or magical assistance. Make that serious, emphasize it. Do not have it as something like they are too good-hearted and wholesome to properly compete against these horrid other species. Either this, or make them a major antagonist, as audiences are already likely to root against them. Or don't and find a different use for these creatures. Fifis are completely subjective, and all you can do is try to corral them. We are here to focus on the more objective faculties of a setting, so let's get back on track. Magic and divine assistance are all well and good, but do not fully cover the general theme of receiving help. Said help can be extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, outside of this world. Ancient Aliens is a good laugh when it comes to actual history, but it is not a bad premise for a fictional one. Sci-fi generally does not have the problem we are discussing today, since the scope is often much wider than other genres. Having several species from different planets appear in the same place is an organic and realistic thing to happen. But when it comes to a single globe, science fiction elements can do a lot of heavy lifting without resorting to all-powerful beings. It may be an experiment, it may be motivated by morality. The goal could even be something as simple as entertainment or profit. Technologically advanced species leaving their home to propagate, protect, teach, elevate or alter life on a different planet can be an explanation for a host of different world-building choices. This also includes our specific issue. However, these aliens are presumably still fallible, and their methods are probably not seamless. They lack the omniscience of a deity, or its omnipotence for that matter. This is more so abrasive interference, crude artificial augmentation, or military enforcement. They are, after all, trying to assure an equal outcome at the cost of equal opportunity. This can take a lot of forms, from morally righteous to utterly despicable, from assisting proliferation to culling the opposition. If you are trying to create a world with some level of status quo, make sure that the solution offers long-term results. Otherwise, you can go nuts, as the failings of such meddling is just as interesting a concept as the idea of bending fate with precision. The only thing that such a setting absolutely needs is a clear motivation for the aliens. Even if it is dynamic and changes over time, there should be a good reason as to why they're expending their time and effort policing a different planet. It is quite the commitment, after all. And with that, I think we can move on to a different set of reasons, ones that originate from environmental situations or innate traits, factors that are natural and could have happened even on our own globe, or in some cases, a lack of certain variables that could have caused the extinction of some species. But with the transition to organic solutions, a new question arises, something that starkly separates these options from the previous three I've mentioned. It is the longevity of these barriers or boons. In many situations, they cannot last indefinitely. However, The unique nature of sapiens and the advantages of high intelligence can, in and of themselves, be justifications in the long run. There is just one initial hurdle we have to get through. Once a species achieves even a relatively simple technological level or spreads across a significantly large area, they are more likely to last than not. In the best case scenario, sapient species match each other in their development to some degree, meaning one will never be in the position to genocide the others to the last person. Physical differences matter less and less with each advancement, leading to a competition of intellect rather than strict evolutionary fitness. But even if that isn't the case, once a species has taken a foothold on the global stage, meaning they reached a sufficiently high population, they would be difficult to get rid of. A couple 100,000 individuals, or preferably millions, pose quite the obstacle for complete annihilation. Which is not to say it is not possible, of course, but even with a more powerful aggressor, assimilation or subjugation are more likely to occur. We do not really have one-to-one examples for this on Earth, as humans are a single species, but the perseverance of cultures can be somewhat likened to this theoretical phenomenon. Given more time, even these imbalances may disappear. Societal enlightenment, growing compassion, developing an understanding of each other, and how everyone shares what we can only refer to as the human condition. The complete disappearance of interspecies tensions might be too utopistic of an idea for most settings, but it is not the goal of this video to discuss that. We are merely here to ensure survival up to a point where meaningful interactions are possible. So let's get back on track. How can a species pass this first speed bump and not disappear in the annals of history? How can we achieve a situation where not only the peak competitor or competitors make it? Well, isolation is quite a simple solution. For primitive peoples, or more so creatures on the verge of becoming people, some obstacles can prove impossible. Vast oceans or other uninhabitable barriers can provide a buffer for the less fit species to gain a foothold. They may even share a common ancestor with other species but simply evolved differently. Since genetic flow is cut off, it would be unlikely for the two populations to end up the same after all. Due to the random nature of mutations, some level of distinction is likely, even if they evolved convergently. That being said, such a scenario needs the separation to happen long before sapience is achieved. Intelligent creatures will find a way to overcome the distance far quicker than the time it takes to develop into a different species. And while we are at the topic of overcoming the distance, those obstacles need to be damn good. Taking a look at early human migrations, distance matters little, and even a bit of sailing on rudimentary boats is likely to happen. Think more so on the scale of Iceland, by which I mean its distance from Europe, not the island itself. It is easy to confuse this solution with one that relies more so on adaptation to different environments, but the emphasis here is on impassable barriers. The advantage this provides is to have highly similar species in either appearance, skill set, or way of living. While they might end up killing each other or hybridize into a single creature in close proximity, that is not an option here. Strange as it might be, millennia-long isolation is one of the more natural ways to have the usual culprits of a fantasy ensemble, your different flavors of humans. As I've said, if half-elves are a possibility in the world, one of the parents would likely have gone the way of the Neanderthals otherwise. But let's backtrack a bit more. I have already introduced another approach that is somewhat similar. You see, the world is a diverse place, lots of different environments with their own sets of challenges. Challenges that require different adaptations or offer varying amounts of resources. This is where exceedingly different creatures shine. Reptilian beings that tolerate a hot and wet habitat, swimming, crawling, climbing their way where apes have trouble leaving the trees. Blind troglodytes thriving in vast underground networks, feeling their way through the tunnels with whisker-like appendages or using echolocation to hunt. An inhospitable place for surface dwellers. White-furred mammals claiming the cold tundra and even Arctic lands, with eyes adapted to scour the blinding whiteness, and natural tools to uncover precious resources below the frozen snow. Most contenders would have an uphill battle trying to compete with them for survival here. Unique species specialized for given environments. Being a jack of all trades can work out under more amicable conditions, but going all out on a niche can earn one a solid place in the global ecosystem. Naturally, since these are sapient beings we are discussing, their intellect would make them less dependent on the conditions of their home. Conversely, others advancing their technology would also make these places more approachable. As with most solutions, this is more defining the earlier we are in the timeline. They would spread to lands they are not uniquely fit for, while others would move on to where they dwelt initially. Separation by habitat is temporary, but biology is not. It is important to keep in mind that this has long-term ramifications for a species. They will have distinct weaknesses and strengths based on their ancestral home, features that overlap with more than just ecology. What their society looks like, what they can do better or worse than others, how they do what they do, are all rooted in their primal style of living, their biology. The physical form of a being is far more than a cosmetic choice. I'm looking at you, Age of Wonders 4. I love you, but species being a glorified skin for your soldiers makes me want to peel my face off with a butter knife. But we are not here to talk game design. The topic is world design, and this facet is not too difficult. Big boy stronger than small boy. Creature with no arms will not try to use tools like humans. Thing that spent centuries inventing horticulture will have a different society than one that eked out an existence by hunting and fishing in sub-zero temperatures. It's true for humans, it will be doubly so for much more diverse creatures. That being said, actually making a species well adapted to a certain environment is a pivotal part of this. It is the foundation on which everything is built. It would be quite silly to have desert-dwelling amphibians, for instance. Whether you start by having a habitat and designing a creature for it, or going backwards and making up an environment where a species would appear, making the two fit logically is your end goal here. Creature design is an art form of its own, one too complex to really go into here. I will cover it in depth, just not today. You could watch my other series for inspiration, or find someone else that does this in the meantime. I hear Chimera is nice this time of the year. That being said, there is one piece of simple advice I will provide. Take a look at nature. Try to find the closest analog, be it an animal or region, and study it a bit. Understanding why certain adaptations are the way they are, why creatures do what they do and how, why things look the way they do there. This is an approach that can help you a lot in your design work. Also, try to work in how and why the creatures in question developed a high level of intelligence. Just taking an animal and making it stand upright is rarely the optimal solution. A reason for well-developed hands is usually a good start, like climbing or using primitive tools. But I digress. We still have a lot to go over in terms of potential solutions, and even a problem I have yet to mention. So let's move on with the other side of the same coin I've just discussed. Having a competitive advantage that is not dependent on a highly different habitat. You see, there is a number of potential resources in more hospitable regions. Part of the reason why we have food webs rather than food chains. An omnivorous, diverse diet is preferable for a sapient being, not in small part due to the contents of their cranium. However, human history shows us that it can be narrowed down by quite a bit, and people will still persevere. So, in theory, two sapient species could very well coexist and develop side by side in a single habitat, given that they consume and compete for different resources. Well, basic resources necessary for survival. For example, wood and water during the infancy of their intellectual awakening will not cause them to kill each other. You'd have to fast forward quite a bit for that to start happening. But for their early development, let's have a semi-aquatic creature adept at catching fish and other animals living by the waterside, and a breed of large herbivorous beings gathering food on the surrounding plains. They could live in harmony, perhaps even trade trinkets and share information. Theoretically, that is. In my video on potential reasons for conflicts between sapient species, I talk about quite a few scenarios that might complicate their relationship. That is for you to work out though, as it all depends on the specifics of the creatures. Either way, differences do not even need to be as apparent as in the example I mentioned. It could be as subtle as an advantage over terrain or proper defenses against a predator. Maybe one species is immune to a toxin produced by a rather ubiquitous toad, one that can offer them enough food, as another sapient being is somewhat better at hunting animals. I'm more so talking about the two people diverging out of necessity, rather than having evolved distinct strategies for survival. The key here is simply to allow all of the species involved to eke out an existence of their own based on their one strong point. The opportunity this provides for a world builder is that interactions can begin even before the first complex thought forms in the minds of these soon-to-be peoples. Ancestral grudges, deep, primordial affinities, legends and mythologies that intertwine, approaching the same concepts from widely different perspectives. This can give enough inspiration to fully flesh out a segment of the world. Once you figure out the initial details, the rest kind of writes itself in my experience. The end result will be a strong foundation and an even stronger identity for what gives the world more weight than history. Speaking of history, there is one more closely linked possibility to ensure multiple species establishing themselves in a setting. Besides having advantages to nudge others in a direction where they are no longer direct competition, there are other ways to have an edge. What I mean here is perseverance. Even if one species is out to destroy another, taking all available resources, killing any they catch sight of, all around being a nuisance, there is a way to survive. Having an adaptation that just makes you almost impossible to exterminate. Admittedly, this is a bit difficult to justify in many situations, if you rely on evolution that is, but there are ways. These species would likely have to be small, difficult to catch or even notice at times, utilizing what little they can get their hands on to the fullest. Then there is also the switch from a K strategy to an R strategy, meaning producing as many offspring as you can with a short life expectancy and an accelerated rate of maturing. This goes against the main advantage of high intelligence, as every individual would have a very limited time to learn, innovate, and achieve anything of significance. That being said, if their perception, their thoughts, their movement is also significantly quicker than ours, they may be able to capitalize on what sapiens can offer. Some R-strategist species are quite smart after all. Just look at rats. Yes, having something akin to Skaven is likely possible without magic. An intelligent breed of vermin that claw their way into the future by the skin of their teeth, using every scrap they can get their hands on, likely developing a resentment towards their oppressors. While the resentment is justified in this situation, this is all a double-edged blade. If you make a functional R-strategist sapient species, they could quickly become the dominant force of the world. They would drown out other intelligent beings with sheer numbers and an insatiable hunger for more resources. If they are successful, that just means more of them will survive. If they advance their technology, that only means they can utilize even more resources. They would likely speedrun the destruction of their own planet or civilization. History would probably be a series of hard population crashes with just enough survivors to start the process all over again. In all honesty, however cruel or evil we may deem those that indiscriminately slaughter these short-lived critters, they are likely saving a lot of lives, potentially even the entirety of the setting. Morality really takes a backseat here, as suffering and death are inevitable. So, as you can see, speed, especially developmental speed, can have a huge effect on how history is shaped. But if we take a look at humans and their technological advancements, we can see that it is far from a steady and universal pace. Certain events, pressures, or scarcity can push nations to progress faster on both a societal and scientific level. Even with this single species, some conflicts were widely imbalanced precisely due to the difference in technology. An inevitability due to the heterogeneous nature of a planet's surface, but also a tool for worldbuilding. This is a tricky one for sure, but achieving sapience and developing a society will not happen at universally shared dates. It is certainly preferable to keep them close when developing beings of similar fitness, but let's see a different possibility. Let's say we have some halflings that happen to have evolved where orcs are beginning to form. If we talk about the stereotypical versions of these creatures, there is just no chance for fair competition here. Halfling neck goes snap. If they appear at roughly the same time, they will likely have similar tools to try and fend off each other. A light tap at the kneecap versus a vicious bash at the skullcap. Orcs can hunt better, defend themselves better, harvest resources better, carry more stuff around, and just generally enforce their will on the world more effectively. But what if halflings become self-aware earlier or manage to achieve scientific breakthroughs well in advance? What if they already figured out metallurgy when orcs first grabbed a stick to clobber some shorties with? The balance of power shifts. Perhaps not enough for such shorties to exterminate orcs for good, but certainly enough to ensure their survival. With all that said, the reason I claim this solution to be tricky is the snowball effect. Technological development tends to be exponential, with the first few steps being the hardest. Since evolving sapience is kind of difficult to draw a date for, it is similarly hard to figure out where the underdog should be in terms of their research. Then there is also the fact that fighting or coexisting with a much more advanced nation tends to accelerate the development of your people as well. Simply put, a kingdom of halflings armed with gunpowder and high quality steel would be really strange next to a bunch of orcs struggling to tie rocks to sticks. It is not exactly realistic and will therefore make the audiences less likely to buy into your world. Still, with the right balance, this can absolutely work. It also makes some rather interesting storytelling options, mostly rooted in how the more advanced species interacts with the one lagging behind. Do they shepherd them? Do they look down on them? Do they exploit them? Perhaps each nation has a different approach. Speaking of a different approach, here's an out-of-left-field solution to our problem, one that might not be the most seamless, but it is still perfectly valid: a general lack of bloodlust. It is entirely possible to have sapient creatures that have enough resources to coexist and just do not have the urge to dominate. Granted, evolution tends to favor aggression, as culling the competition is quite a valid strategy. But it is certainly not impossible that the beings that wrinkle their brain into sapience are just not that fierce. Maybe their ancestors were more skittish, or they prefer to conserve their energy and not expend it over conflict they might very well lose. Whatever the origin of their condition, I see no reason why the dice could not roll this way. Now, once they grow to sufficiently large communities and the resources start becoming scarce, conflict would likely rear its ugly head. I do not think it plausible that from the birth of civilization to the space age there would be no war or bloodshed, even for the most peaceful of races. Hard times call for hard decisions, and watching your children starve to death is probably less of an option than grabbing a weapon and trying to save them at the expense of others. The first ever war in such a setting would be quite the story to tell. One full of incompetency, unprecedented cruelty, and battered ideals. Ultimately, worldbuilding exists to support storytelling, to offer a context that determines the gravity of each action, a framework that allows audiences to buy into the plot. As a tool that serves believability, it is best used with subtlety. Worldbuilding is the nuts and bolts that hold a plywood set together. If they are clearly visible, it can take one out of the experience. This is not new information, of course. I've already talked about this, as have many before me. However, it bears emphasizing here. The majority of possible scenarios listed in the video are background information, so much so that the inhabitants of the world would not even think about it. It would be natural for them, the norm, with no need to explain why things are the way they are. This is where artistry and self-control take the lead. Finding ways to diegetically and preferably slowly introduce the individual building blocks of your setting, rather than splurting it all into the eyes of the audience. Unless something is highly plot relevant, like for the warless setting I've coined, there is no need to mention anything. Rather, minor details like this are best hinted at, adding depth without clobbering people in the head with a hefty, inorganic load of exposition. For instance, just showing the different traits or habitats of a species will be enough information in this regard. I usually don't talk about my own setting, which I've been building on and off for the past couple of years. I have plans with it, but let's not get into the details. The reason I mention that world now is because it too has quite the abundance of sapient species. It is definitely not as diverse as something like D&D, but the total number is in the mid-tens. Therefore, this is an issue I have faced myself. I've made several concessions concerning the biology and origin of many species, separating lineages and planning migration routes. That is information I will use, but mostly as guidelines for myself. The majority of these tidbits have gone largely unmentioned and unreferenced in stories I have written for the setting, and will likely never see the light of day beyond indirect allusions. Even the most important aspect of this, the underlying reason as to why sapiens evolved simultaneously in so many creatures, a strategy that is relatively rare to naturally occur, even that is not something I plan to ever spell out. It is not something the participants of the stories know, it is a situation they exist in. So, I've spent the better half of an hour talking about something that barely matters? No, absolutely not. Good worldbuilding is defined by the foundations. Making up a setting with some vague ideas is not difficult, but it is also something that might start falling apart the moment you start asking questions. On the other hand, if one spends the time to account for those questions and lets inquisitive people find satisfying answers for themselves, immersion remains unbroken. It draws you in even deeper. This is the magic of worldbuilding, making the audience want to engage with it, see the stories that take place there, recognize the references, and find out more and more with time. The question we have discussed today will not occur to the vast majority of people, yet it is still one potential flaw keeping a world from being the best version of itself. I'm starting to see why people call me pretentious. Still, I'm enthusiastic about this, and if you watched for this long, maybe you are too. That's why I have some relevant links in the description. You can't see it, but I'm winking with my other eye. I have no idea what my recent release schedule looks like when this video comes out, but I apologize if I've been gone for long. Rest assured, I was working on stuff in the background. Hopefully everything sees the light of day soon, if it hadn't already. I'm terrible at ending videos.